Good afternoon, everybody, and a warm welcome to today's webinar on gender equality. It's not all about pay. I'm very happy to moderate this webinar today, which is a joint event between Eurofound and EIGE, and builds on some of the work that we have done on gender equality in both agencies. The webinar is held today for a very particular reason, and as you probably all know, today is the European Equal Pay Day, which marks the time or the period left for equal pay. Basically, women are today, across on average in the European Union, paid 14% less than men are, which means that for every euro a man is paid, women are paid 86 cents. So that basically, not quite, but nearly accounts for 1.5 months of unpaid work for the rest of the year. So it really marks the path that is left to achieve equal pay in Europe. So today's webinar will try to engage with this issue in terms of setting out the observations, where are we with regard to equal pay? Where are we with regard to gender equality in the European Union? And most importantly, also to engage with the issues like what is it that we need to do to engage? What is it that we need to carry forward in order to achieve gender equality and achieve equal pay? I mean, equal pay has been enshrined in the treaties for more than 60 years, and we have not quite achieved in implementing the equal pay. So I'm really, really happy to be able to moderate the distinguished panel that we have today. And what we have Martina Bisello from Eurofound, who will talk to us about, who's a research manager at Eurofound, and who will speak to us about recent research that we have conducted on the state of gender equality and some of the drivers of unequal pay, I would say. Thereafter, we have Blandine Mollard from EIGE, who will engage with some of the main drivers with regard to unequal pay, namely the unpaid work, but also other issues. And finally, very happy to invite Frances Fitzgerald, Irish MEP, who is also a full member of the Women's Rights and Gender Equality Committee, but also of the Economic and Monetary Affairs Committee at the European Parliament, to come and speak to us about what are the political actions that have been taken and what is it that what are we seeing coming up in terms of action that could be taken in order to achieve gender equality. So a rather full agenda. Now, what we want to do is to have a discussion and a debate with the audience. So during the introductory remarks that we will start with in a second, I would be very happy if you could engage with the experts that we have on our panel today and pop your questions in the chat. So if you put your questions in the chat, I will, along the webinar, take some of the questions and put them to our experts so that we can have a dialogue and a discussion around equal pay, around gender equality. Despite the fact that we are virtual, we still want to have an interactive session. So with these introductory words, I would very much like Martina to come and talk to us about where are we today? Where are we with regard to equal pay? Where are we with regard to identifying and being able to engage with some of the drivers of the unequal pay that remains in the European Union? Please, Martina.
Thank you so much, Maria, and good afternoon to everyone. It's first of all, let me say that it's really great to take part to this discussion today around such an important topic together with you, the other co-panelists, and our virtual audience all around Europe. There is little doubt that in the last decades there has been considerable progress in terms of gender equality in the labor market and at work, but we're all aware that there are still outstanding challenges, and the persisting gender pay gap is certainly one of them. As you mentioned in your introduction, the latest figures from 2019 show that the gender pay gap stands at around 14%. So this means that on average, women are paid on a hourly basis 14% less than men. Now, the good news is that pay differentials between men and women have decline over time, especially in the last few years. But this decline has been somehow slower than one could have expected, given the huge increase in female labor market participation, and especially women's typically higher educational attainment among the younger cohorts. So in a way, we can say that even larger pay gaps have been prevented by higher educational attainment levels among women in many countries. It is also important to note that women are more likely to be minimum wage earners. So latest figures show that women account for around 60% of minimum wage earners, and considering that actually they typically make up less than 50% of the workforce, this means that they are significantly overrepresented in this category. Now, to go back to your question, what we know about the key drivers of the gender pay gap, there are several factors. Three are mostly important. One is certainly the sectors, the economic activity where women are employed. The second one would be mostly related to working time, and particularly the incidence of women in part-time work. And the third one, it's more related to holding or not a supervisory position within companies. So if we go quickly through these 3 points, starting from the first one, the first most important factor is that women are still today overrepresented in lower paying sectors compared to men, especially service sectors. We know that around 9 out of 10 personal care workers in the healthcare sectors are women. Around 7 out of 10 salesperson in retail are women. We know that women are also overrepresented in low-paying cleaning jobs, for instance. On the other hand, only 1 out of 5 IT specialists are women, and we know that IT sectors is notably much higher paid. So there is this huge gap in terms of uneven distribution of women in different sectors. And the most striking findings is that the gender pay gap is actually higher in well-paid jobs. So not only women are less well represented in higher paying jobs, but when they do work in high paying jobs, there is a higher pay differential. Now, the second factor that I mentioned relates to the fact that women remain overrepresented in part-time jobs. We know that around 1 out of 3 women are working part-time in the EU. Now, when this reflects a freedom of choice, working part-time provides flexibility. Once involuntary, however, this working time arrangements also restricts access to better jobs, and it can have long-term implications in terms of financial stability, and then down the line in terms of a gender pension gap. And we also know that one of the main causes, main barriers which prevent women not only from accessing the labor market, but also work full-time is ongoing care responsibilities. And that's not to the same extent for men. The third important element to explain the gender pay gap is that women are less likely to occupy positions with supervisory responsibilities, which are usually associated with higher pay levels. So there are elements of gender segregation that takes place both horizontally across sectors, but also vertically within firms that are very important to understand and explain the gender pay gap. Now, overall, we actually can explain only 1/3 of the gender pay gap with observable characteristics based on wage survey data. The 2/3 of the gap is actually unexplained. It is very likely that this is related to several factors. One would be discrimination in the workplace. There are discrimination can take various forms. So one would be also unfair promotion practices, which then leads to different patterns in terms of career progression. There are other unobservable factors that one might think of as contributors of the gender pay gap. For instance, differences between men and women in wage bargaining or attitudes or negotiating skills, but also very important is to take into account to understand that better the gender pay gap is the fact that women have interrupted career due to maternity leave or family-related leave. So to sum up, I mean, the picture is quite complex. We know partly what drives the gap. Gender segregation in the labor market is certainly relevant to explain it, but also still a large share of the gap remains unexplained, and certainly having a more transparency around that and improved data collection, it's would be welcome.
Okay, thank you very much, Martina. So, kind of a picture that shows that there's still a lot of challenges, but that there's not a silver bullet, that it's a very multidimensional issue that needs to be tackled from different angles. Blondina, you have carried out research with regard to, well, first of all, you've been a part of the team that has been setting up the Gender Equality Index over the past years. And one of the factors in this gender equality is of course, the whole issue about time use. It's about the care. And as Martina just said, it could seem that it explains quite a part of the unexplained of the pay gap. So, Blondine, what has your research showed about the unexplained factor space?
Thank you, Maria, and welcome everyone. Yes, we already know that care responsibilities are holding women back in terms of job prospects and influencing the choice that they are making in their professional lives. But the burden of unpaid care is also aggravating inequalities in pay. As you just said, it's considered as being one of the factors of this unexplained part of the gender pay gap. In particular, this burden of unpaid care plays a really large role in several of the big contributors that Martina presented, namely the fact that women work part-time more, the fact that they are more likely to have temporary or low-paid jobs, and that they are underrepresented in managerial positions. So as you said, Eiger has worked on the links between unpaid care and pay inequalities. And what we found is that care is still considered to this day, despite the progress that we are seeing on many, many fronts in the gender equality realm, care is still considered women's responsibility in the family. Only 1 family in 3 reports an equal sharing of care tasks within the household. And this phrasing, really, it's me trying to be positive, because I could have always also said that in 2/3 of the families in the EU, care tasks fall on women. So to give you an idea, employed women in the EU spend almost 4 hours on unpaid care every day, on top of their paid job. Employed men spend 2.6 hours per day. So as a result, we see a gender gap in daily unpaid care of 90 minutes a day. So when looking at the gender pay gap and really any gender inequalities in pay and earnings, we really advocate for looking at a life course perspective. Because while we see that the gender pay gap tends to be very low at entry level when entering the labor market, the difference really grows substantially along the career path and along increasing family demands. So just like Martina said, in terms of the pay gap being wider for higher paying workers, we see that among those aged 20-29, the average gender pay gap is really minimal, about 3%. However, it rises with age and starting at 22% among 40-49 age for workers, which is the age where you have you're likely to have care responsibilities, either because you have children or you have elderly parents or other family members that may need your help. So this increases in the gender pay gap across the life course coincides with 2 major patterns. As I said, increasing work experience and income levels, but also intensification of family responsibilities. So this life course perspective also shows that family formation and increasing family responsibilities increase inequalities in pay. When we look at the different life stages, the higher gender inequalities in earnings are found among women living in couples with children under 7. And among couples where the youngest child is older than 7, we see the gender gap starts reducing, but it's still considerably higher than for women who don't have children or for during other life stages. So this is really something that tells us the effect of family demands, caring roles can have on pay. So basically, having children, having a family imposes a significant and persistent penalty on women's pay, and we don't see a similar penalty applied to men's pay. And this penalty also applies to a lesser extent to the pay of women without children. So another aspect that we found is that the limited use of work-life balance mechanisms by men exacerbate the gender pay gap. Because due to the unequal distribution of care, we see that women are more likely than men to request and to be granted flexible working arrangements, with the take-up among men remaining really low. We see large gender gaps in monthly earnings among workers who have greater freedom to set their own working hours. And this is mainly due to women and men using work flexibility for different purposes. Because women tend to use flexible working arrangements to better reconcile work and family responsibilities, and men tend to use them to increase their work intensity. In particular, we see that women and men who regularly work long hours, so over 10 hours per day, tend to receive the highest earnings and also the more equitable earnings. So it means that the gender gap in earnings is lower for people who regularly work 10 hours or more. However, we know that it's a bit harder for women to work such long hours on a regular basis. So the expectations to work long hours and to be constantly available not only somehow limits men's ability to engage with family caring duties, for example, but it also constitutes an obstacle to closing the gender pay gap. So to conclude, I would like to emphasize that our policy analysis and our statistical data analysis has shown that external services, for example, summer camp for children or after-school care or long-term care facilities, are often either insufficient or they are unavailable or they are unaffordable to many, many families in the EU. And therefore, external services are really unable to offset this unequal sharing within the family that we discussed. We've seen especially when it comes to long-term care, which will be which is a pressing concern in the EU. So this really pushes women to fill these care gaps themselves, with consequences on their pay for now, but also for their pensions in the future. So in a nutshell, that's a bit what I wanted to highlight today, and I'm really looking forward to the discussion.
Okay, thanks, Let. I mean, what we've been talking about until now, Martina and Blandine, is we've been putting forward average figures, the global picture within the European Union. But what is actually happening in different parts of the European Union? I know that Eurofound and EGA has done some joint work on convergence, upward convergence and gender equality. What does it actually show? Are we actually getting an upwards convergence? Are we all heading the same way? Maybe Martina can give us the more general picture and to just give us a feeling of where we're heading, not on average, but in terms of the various member states. What's the dynamics at the moment? Please, Martina.
Yeah, thank you, Maria. I mean, as you said, we published this very nice piece of work together with colleagues at EIGE, and we look at in patterns of convergence in gender equality measured by the Gender Equality Index in different member states, basically to see whether progress toward gender equality has fulfilled the aspiration of upward social and economic convergence in the EU. What we see in terms of broad findings is that over the last decade, the EU has made progress toward gender equality, despite slow. But achievements in gender equality vary considerably among member states. So this clearly has strong implications in terms of upward economic and social convergence in the EU, because ideally, from a gender equality perspective, progress would ideally be observed in each member state to begin with, and with less gender equal societies catching up with the most gender equal ones, and therefore reducing the overall disparities. What we saw from our own analysis is that overall there has been a long-term trends towards upward convergence in gender equality in the EU. There has been progress in gender equality, which was accompanied by a moderate reduction in disparities among member states. This was especially recorded in the years between 2015 and 2018, while instead the disparities, so divergence among member states, was more pronounced between 2010 and 2014, mainly because of different way of member states to deal with gender inequalities in the economic and political sphere, notably with the introduction of some gender balance quotas in some countries, which drove then a kind of pattern of divergence. The good news is that countries with initial lower level of gender equalities are actually progressing faster than others. This is the case, for instance, of some Southern European member states like Italy, Malta, or Cyprus, but also some of the Baltic, and notably Estonia recorded quite a significant progress. On a less encouraging note, we have other member states, especially from Central and Eastern Europe, which were already trailing behind in 2010 and then improved their performance in terms of gender equality at a lower pace than the EU, therefore increasing the gap. So this is a little bit in a nutshell the picture, and crucially the impact of COVID may result in increasing disparities between member states, but we know that the consequences of the crisis are still unfolding, but this is certainly a clear implication in terms of convergence or divergence patterns in gender equality.
Thank you. So Blondine, so those are the kind of the general trends, and you just launched your Gender Equality Index 2021 that kind of takes a look at what's going on in the recent period. What is your take on what's going on with regards to the convergence, the way that the various member states within the European Union are moving forward? Are there any particular drivers that are more strong in driving this convergence, or less strong in driving the convergence? Is it all the same factors contributing to it?
So yeah, I just want to emphasize what Martina has said, that yes, there has been some convergence, but progress has been very, very slow over the last decade, and most of it is due to strides and progress made in the domain of power, which reflects really advances in gender balance in either political representation or economic power. So especially in terms of progress on company boards, for example, this is really what has been driving the progress overall for the Gender Equality Index scores. And in this context, we see very different patterns. So we see an upward convergence in a way. So there is progress, but actually, upward divergence in the sense that we see progress, but mainly for countries who at very unequal pace. So progress is mainly and almost solely for countries who have adopted legislative measures towards improving the representation of women on company boards. And those countries who have adopted quotas have really progressed quite fast. But those who haven't really are somehow stagnating or stalling in their progress with the domain of power. We see another pattern which is quite promising. It's the upward convergence when it comes to full-time equivalent employment rates. So we see progress, general progress across the EU countries in terms of employment. One aspect that really I would like to emphasize is that when it comes to understanding how men and women use their time, the time used reflected in the domain of time of the index, we are a bit constrained with absence of regular data. And the scores that we have at the moment, which are really nothing to be proud of, 64.9 points out of 100, that really shows all those entrenched gender inequalities in time use that I referred to. This data is from 2016. So unfortunately, analysis on convergence when it comes to the use of time is a little bit limited by this data. But we are working on updating data on time use in the EU with our own survey. But maybe I will touch upon that a bit later in the conversation.
Okay, thanks a lot, Blondine. So, Francis, that's quite a lot of challenges that has been put on the table that one needs to engage with. So, as we know, the gender pay gap is not, there's no kind of silver bullet. It's really a multidimensional problem, issue, and so one would need to engage on a host of different areas to be able to kind of get to equal pay at the end of the day. So maybe you can help us a little bit okay, we've already got a lot of legislation, we've got a lot of initiatives, but we're still there with unequal pay. So what is it that we need to do now?
Good afternoon. I think we have to do an awful lot. The title is provocative. I was trying to figure out what you meant by it. It's not all about pay. Well, a hell of a lot of it is, actually. In Europe, we tend to say we have to look at things through a whole variety of lenses. We have to look at through the lens of climate, the lens of digital, the lens of COVID, of course, COVID and post-COVID. I add in equality and caring. And I think actually all of these have a role to play in actually getting to the point of gender equality, and pay equality is an important part of that. So what I would say is that, first of all, we've got to see what the gap is, continue to highlight it. I mean, the pension pay gap, I think, is just enormous across Europe. It's 39%. So we've really got to help societies to understand the implications of that for women, for families, for poverty, for older age of women and men. I think we have to continue to be very impatient at national and European levels in terms of where we're at in relation to gender equality. Great thanks to IGE and Eurofound for your stats and your work. We rely on them. I rely on them hugely. The FAM committee, of which I'm a member and a coordinator for my group, rely on them. I think they're incredibly important, and we just need to really make sure people hear them again and again. Now, there's different things will make a difference, and I'll throw out some ideas. Okay, first of all, the proposal on pay transparency, that's very important. We've got to make sure that happens. I'll mention the fact that I've just come back from Iceland, who are #1 on gender equality. I was there last week. And it's very interesting. They're kind of moving in a way, if I say beyond equal pay, inclusive of equal pay, but they're moving to what they're calling pay equity, and they're getting companies and public institutions to do what they call pay analytics, to really say, and I quote from a CEO of the top Icelandic bank who said to me, to us as a group, she said, let's look in every organization, what's the pay? Let's take the top line. What's the pay of women? What's the pay of men? And then you have to reduce that gap. And you have to say, where are the gaps? Are they in investment bankers and banking? So why aren't we getting more women into investment banking? If it's in the health services, why are all the women down at certain levels, or even where they're doing higher level jobs, we're not valuing it enough? So I personally think we need a new conversation about value, the value of work. And there's very interesting work going on about this, because of course, the key issue is the segregated workplaces. And jobs, I should say, not just workplaces, but jobs. This is a huge issue around equal pay. And how do you deal with that sort of segregation? But also, how do you value the areas that are segregated where women are mostly? So you've got to take, for example, an area that I've been doing an awful lot of work on with my team here in Brussels, with my party, is the care economy. If you ask me the thing that would make the biggest difference, one of the areas I would point to is a revaluing of care work. Because care work has been done by women, care work is undervalued. How do we change that? I believe we can. And I think the new care strategy that's been announced by Ursula von der Leyen is very important. And I would really urge everybody to get behind it, to make submissions, to be involved in it, because the recommendations coming out about that, first of all, we're going to describe care work across Europe because it lacks description. Who's doing it? Who's being cared for? We're going to look at the funding. Is the funding that's going in, all of those $1 trillion 1.68 trillion or something, a bit more maybe, that's going into our member states. That could be spent on care infrastructure. That could be spent on these areas and make a huge difference. Look at the work-life balance. You've already been addressing that. Of course, working from home or remote working or hybrid working is not a substitute for childcare. So we really need, I mean, the undervaluing of care leads directly to our unwillingness to invest as much as we should in most of the countries in Europe. I mean, in most of the countries of Europe, some exceptions, probably Nordic, maybe France, where it's, you know, there's you have to pay a certain amount, but it's still too onerous on couples in Ireland or individuals, far too onerous. So, I mean, I think this care issue is absolutely critical, and that we really need to to work on that. So this new care strategy is going to be very important. So the work-life balance directive and its proper implementation is going to be key to resolving this issue. The women in decision-making, more women in decision-making roles. Germany did not progress that. You know, will France? In the next presidency, we have to ask them to progress that. So the value issue is absolutely huge. Now, let me just, broaden it out a little bit. I think we also have to look at, the whole climate change and the impact on women. Yeah, and again, look at decision making there. I spoke to the Icelandic Prime Minister last week. There were 8 women heads of state in Glasgow. The rest were male heads of state. Now that tells you, I've been at UN meetings myself where you have a handful of women, where I was representing the Prime Minister, the Taoiseach, a handful of women and men. So it's right up the political, and we're a disgrace in Ireland, of course, at 22% of women in the Dáil, and it makes a huge difference, this critical mass. So I think women in decision making really matters. And of course, if you look at another area where we're taking initiatives, and that is on gender-based violence. I mean, the amount that's lost because of gender-based violence and the poorer status of women as a result. We're looking at interesting issues now, like potentially leave from workplaces because of dealing with court cases in relation to gender-based violence and so on. That's kind of an interesting area as well, so that women's careers aren't totally interrupted by that experience and they get support from their companies. I'll make one final point, and it's this. Two. One is the differential impact of COVID. We need to be aware of that. So in terms of recovery, we need to be thinking about supports and training for women, moving into different areas and so on. And again, there's money for that. And the other point is having champions from business, having champions from male champions. I think we need more male champions in this whole area of equality. And I think that can really make a difference, whether you're talking about human rights defenders and good practices in companies, or whether you're talking about some of the issues we've been discussing here today. And of course, the final area we need to be very cognizant, especially post-COVID, is we've had increases in FGM, we've had increases in young marriage, and young women's and men's, of course, education being interrupted. So all of these things play into one another. I think we are making progress, but I think the big message has to be that we have to accelerate it. And thank you again for the invitation to be with you today and to comment on some of these very central issues for all of us.
Okay, thank you very much, Frances. I think you raised a point that we actually haven't touched upon yet. So the various initiatives that are taking place, pay transparency, the work-life balance directive, the upcoming care strategy that, as you say, it's really important to keep an eye on that one and provide the data that we actually don't really have yet. But what we haven't touched upon yet, and you raised it, is the COVID-19 crisis and the gendered impact that it's had. And what you were saying was, as we go out, we have to be very careful about factoring in that there has been a gendered impact. And as we go out, we cannot ignore to take it into consideration. And you also raised the issue of telework that we haven't engaged in as well, which is kind of it's an old phenomena, but the extent of it and the space that it's taking right now is new. And I think if you work within the gender policy, gender studies, you right away, have kind of alarm bells going off with regard to telework. As you said, it cannot compensate for care work or care services. So, I mean, Blondine and Martina, maybe you want to get back a little bit on, we have some current data on the impact of COVID-19 on women. But if we try to polish our crystal ball a little bit, what are some of the issues that you think that we would need to take into consideration? As what Francis was saying, that there are a lot of dimensions, but is there anything else that we would need to be aware of, factor into to our monitoring, factor into our analysis, please? Let me, Blondine, you wanted to take the first step?
Yeah, I mean, from the preliminary findings, we can see that some of the sectors that have been hit the most and the most severely in the labor markets have been sectors where women are overrepresented, and also sectors that are already struggling with precarious conditions, working conditions, for example, accommodation or food services or retail. So we can expect some really, really important consequences on women's labor market participation, and maybe ultimately that could affect the gender pay gap. But also, one of the really strong impact on gender equality that the pandemic has had is this phenomenal increase of the unpaid care burden. When you don't have any access to any external services anymore, when grandparents or friends or neighbors are off the table because of the pandemic, well, everything fell on families themselves, and we know that it wasn't pre-existing inequalities in sharing have been sometimes aggravated. So it has fell mainly on women, on working women. So the restrictions have had a really incredible impact on unpaid care. So this could have lasting effects on women's career progression and the gender pay gap. Another aspect that I think we need also to keep in mind is if we are moving towards a really long-term telework arrangements, that they are becoming much more common, then we also are facing a bit of a divide between the workers who can telework and the workers who cannot telework. And sometimes that can be because of the sectors, but it can also be due to digital skills. And we know that women, especially over 50, are not always really at the level of digital skills that is required at the moment for really, keeping up with telework on the long term. And so people who will have really really good digital skills will be better positioned. So this is also something to monitor, that women workers are not falling off this trend because of lack of skills or access to equipment or things like that.
Thank you, Blondine. Martina?
Yeah, I can only echo some of these main findings. I mean, from a labor market perspective, it is clear that the COVID crisis took a higher toll on women, especially low-paid women. So if we compare for instance, the previous crisis with this one, we see that during the COVID crisis, the aggregate employment losses between men and women were much more balanced compared to the Great Recession, but it's really women in low-paid jobs that have been hit the most. And at the same time, instead, there has been an employment expansion for women in the higher-paying jobs. So as Blandine was saying, this could possibly lead to a divide even within women, between the different categories of women in the labor market, in the sense that we have the lowest paid, which were hit the hardest, and then we had those who actually could just move their work from offices to the home by increasing teleworking. But then this had very strong consequences in terms of work-life balance. For instance, this is a very important aspect. Eurofound research shows that, especially for working parents, there have been negative consequences in terms of work-life balance and mental well-being. And this has been particularly strong for working mothers with small children. And I will share the view that we need to be aware aware of the potential gender aspect of the future of telework. If telework is taken as a kind of coping strategy to combine work and care better. So, and if more women are taking up teleworking possibilities, this could have some implications then in terms of visibility, for instance, and career developments and promotion and so forth. So there are very important implications to be aware of.
Oh yeah.
So Francis, I think during the care work has always been very important, and when you work in the FEM committee or in gender studies, it's very clear. I mean, the formal care and unpaid care work it fills a lot within the discussion about gender equality, and there's been a lot of focus on care, especially in the last period because care has been so fundamental in the COVID crisis, both because it was not available, as Blandine said, but also because many of the frontline workers were actually care workers. And that with the care strategy, do you think there's that we could get a positive outcome with this focus on care, because people have lived it or not lived it, and because that has been a kind of a recognition of the value of care within society? And because there's one from our audience, Harold, that question, so says, what about establishing a gender care gap indicator? So we've got the whole issue about access to formal care, but also the unequal division of care within the family. And I think the gender care gap would refer to that bit, so the unpaid care. Would that be, could we see some kind of gender care gap indicator at EU level in the context of the social scoreboard? So going, like now we have the Barcelona targets with regard to formal care, but do we need an indicator on the unpaid care?
Yes, I mean, one of the suggestions is that we have Barcelona targets on care, and I think from Harold, thank you, the gender care gap indicator at EU level. The more we can do, the more indicators we can have in relation to this, the more we can measure it, and this is really IGE and Eurofound's expertise. I think the more we can share data on this and really drive policy. Now, yes, I agree, COVID gives us a new opportunity. It's a different lens. It's very sadly, but it has given us a lens where care was, more appreciated. And the commissioner looking, for example, at long-term care, they're looking at that whole area, and they'll be doing something on that next year as well. And that's really important given some of what we saw in relation to care. And we really need to be building community care. But I would caution that, it's very easy to revert back to the old ways. I'm even seeing it here in the Parliament, in terms of flexibility, where our flexibility is gone at the moment. Now, that's very interesting for me to see that, and I think it's quite wrong. But, it's very easy to revert to type and not take the learnings. And I think the learnings in relation to care involve policy, they involve, initiatives, they involve money. But, a lot of the money is there. I mean, money is, long-term care costs a lot of money. You begin to shift it around. The money has been given to member states for recovery. And it's very clear, it's meant to be green, it's meant to be digital. They missed an opportunity to make sure that care was included at a high level and gender budgeting at a high level, although it is referenced. We put in a lot of amendments to try and make sure that money would, that equality would be at its core. But in fact, they balked at that at the last minute. The Parliament tried really hard and the Women's Committee tried really hard. People are very nervous about gender budgeting for some reason. It's outrageous, really. And it's just, a kind of a fear. I look, you could speculate forever what's behind it. So, yes, there is a new opportunity here, but translating it into action, you're going to have very specific implementation. That's why I think the care strategy is important. Political parties adopting it is important. In the programme for government from Ireland, in Ireland, there's a commitment to a care commission, which I pushed very hard. We need to have that care commission in Ireland as well, because I think if you deal with the care issues, you're going to deal with a certain amount of the gender pay gap, but it's in all areas, of course, and it's linked to women doing more STEM subjects as well. and AI and the new areas that we've got to make sure that young girls are taking the subjects that would give them those job opportunities.
Thank you, Francis. That brings me to a question that was asked by Maria Isabel, because we've had some discussions about so women on boards and how this is to a certain extent power is driving some of the convergence in terms of gender equality in Europe. We've had the discussion about the segregated labor market, about, also segregations within education, because it's true, women today have on average a high educational attainment, but not in the same, but there's still a segregation within education between men and women. And so what Maria Isabel is saying, what do you think about setting quotas for access to certain positions? So, you could understand it in terms of board or political parties and so forth, but you could also understand it in terms of occupations. So, do we need different quotas with regard to different occupations? Because that seems to be driving, some of the issues that we've talked about today, like low paid work or the gender pay gap and so forth and so forth. Some companies do have some kind of quotas that they install, but it's on a voluntary way. Blondine, does Elge have any thoughts about the setting quotas with regard to occupations?
So just as preamble, I just want to remind us all that quotas and legislative really binding measures to improve the representation of women on quotas or political parties or lists, they do work. You really, really see the impact of them because, for example, when you see the definition of the scope of such binding measures, the minute they stop applying, you see the share of women really plummeting. So they are effective. They are proving that they are really delivering progress. In terms of setting, minimum numbers of women or men in certain professions to reach a bit a better gender balance, I think it deserves reflection, because when we talk about professional choices or choice of studies, people's choice are extremely conditioned by gender roles and gender norms. So it's quite difficult to, of course, incentives can be developed. And something that we notice very much when you look at policy measures or programs set in place, you have so many initiatives to try to bring more women or more girls to study STEM subjects. But you don't see the equivalent for men or boys to start studying or get into professions that are linked to care. So this in itself reflects a bit what you were saying, Frances, about how much we value care as a society and how much we value the work of carers in society. We value it either monetarily in terms of their compensation, their pay, and we know that this is really not much, but we also, how much do we value also socially and in terms of social status? So we could also see progress in terms of seeing more initiatives in bringing more boys and men into those professions. But actual quotas, I think that's not something that's been explored yet.
And I got a little bit of the same question from Alice, which talks about gender quotas in education programs. And that's, Blondine, a little bit what you were hinting to. Frances, is that something that you would discuss at all?
Yes, I actually just put a message there. I have to go because I have a vote. Just to say on quotas, I think quotas and targets are really important, and monitoring them is the key. We've had a quota operating on the side of men in all these areas for a long time. You'd have to look at the specific issues, though, in different areas and how difficult it might be to implement. But in principle, the more monitoring you do, the better. And my apologies that I have to go and vote now. So thank you again for inviting me, and good luck with the rest of the program. Thank you.
Thank you, Frances. Thank you. Okay, but another subject that we haven't touched upon, so I want to walk away from the quotas, but that's something that's really springing up in the discussion, saying, okay, we observe this segregation on the workplace and education and so forth. We know it explains the gender pay gap and a lot of the other gender gaps. And the initiatives, as you say, Blondine, there's a lot of initiatives out there, but it doesn't seem to be able to move the lines very much. So maybe quotas is the next thing to look at. But I want to move on and then go towards a subject that we have not really engaged on today, and that has to do with unionization and collective bargaining. So wages are set in different ways at different levels, so social partners, unions, and collective bargaining is, of course, a part of the wage setting mechanisms. So, and maybe Martina, you can talk to us a little bit about what is kind of the interlinkages between unionization and collective bargaining and the gender pay gap. And maybe also go on then to answer the question, what could be done more at policy level to support better valuing of care jobs? So we spoke a lot about, we need to value care jobs. There might be scope to do it, as there's been more highlights on caring over the past period. But what would be the mechanisms, and what could be done on the policy level to support it?
Yeah, I'm very, very happy to receive these questions, because it gives me the opportunity also to let the audience know that we have a forthcoming policy brief on the gender pay gap being published in December, and we really try to unpack all the dimension of the gender pay gap across different personal and work related characteristics. And one of the key findings is that the gender pay gap is actually lower in establishment covered by collective agreements. So there is certainly an important role there. And in relation to valuing care jobs, I think it goes back a little bit also to the previous question on the quotas, and I think it's important that gender segregation in the labor market is tackled both via labor market policies, but also the education system. In terms of labor market policies, it's really about revaluing improving the job quality of care jobs that are strongly female dominated. So we're talking about improving working conditions, or more in general, but also pay levels. There have been some studies which attempted to attach a monetary value to care work, especially care work that is performed within the household. These are quite challenging methodologically, and we know that we really need more frequent and updated data on unpaid care. But overall, the message is that given the substantial amount of unpaid care that is carried out by women, once you try to estimate the value of it, it is significant, and it does have an impact also in economic terms. So it's not just the social implications in terms of women's life, but also more from an economic perspective.
Yeah, and maybe also get a little refer back to what Frances was talking about, her trip to Iceland last week. And also the Canadian experiment with regard to exactly revaluing work, really going into different occupations and saying what is actually being carried out as tasks, and compare them with the different kind of occupations you have. You do see that, for example, carrying something is not valued the same in different occupations, and often in female occupations it's less valued. It's given less payment, as in more male-dominated occupations. So I think there's something about this revaluing. And Blondina, so on the you said before that you with the data collection on care, on unpaid care, and Martina as well, you were engaging on that issue as well, saying we do have data, but it's kind of old now, and we need more data to actually be able to monitor and assess where we're going. Please, Blondine.
Yes, absolutely. So we're engaging in our own data collection exercise to collect data on time use, so care activities, but also social activities, to understand more and to have more updated data on how women and men articulate paid and unpaid work and how they use their time. So this will help us, monitor the developments more closely, and so we will use the updated data for Index 2023. I also wanted to say that better valuing care jobs comes with massive investment in the care systems. And the Work-Life Balance Directive has been mentioned, and rightly so, because it's quite an historic step in terms of promoting transformative relations and better equal sharing. But it also contains non-legislative parts, which is to try to use EU funds towards infrastructure. And very few member states actually have used those funds for infrastructure on care, especially long-term care. So providing better services, more money into the care system would allow for salary increase, for better working conditions, more training, all the aspects that make quality jobs. And ultimately, we also see that when working conditions and pay improves, the share of men in such professions also improves. So for tackling gender segregations also come with investing more in care professions and providing better compensation, better working conditions for care workers.
Okay, thank you very much, Blandine. So we are close to being on the hour, and Francis has gone off to do the votes in the Parliament. So I think we will start to wrap up the session. So I'm not going to try to summarize everything that was said here, but I do think there's a convergence in terms of in terms of the analysis, in terms of the observations, but also in terms of what are some of the policy solutions that are already out there, but we need to better mobilize, better implement, make better use of, but also how we can move forward. And I think that there was a convergence in terms of saying, okay, there's a kind of a momentum around care right now, which is important for women on various levels, being it because they are the majority of workers, in the care sector, and the working conditions, being pay, working time, and so forth, are not the best. And secondly, also because they're the main users of care, view that the care responsibility is still majority on the women. So maybe that would be kind of a conclusion. But notwithstanding, we still got kind of the more traditional issues at least within labor markets, with labor market economics, which is about the labor market segregations, about how you set pay, and the working time that are still there. And despite the fact we are converging on some of the upwards convergence and some of the indicators, a lot of them are stagnating or are going down. So after this discussion that we had today, and being on the 10th of November, which is the European Equal Pay Day, I would like you, if you could just in a very short sentence, give us, what's the take home? What is it that we need to take home with us after today's webinar, please? And Martina, maybe you want to hit it off. What's the take home from today?
That's a tricky one, because there's been so many interesting things discussed, but probably it would be that the story of women in the labor market and gender equality at work is a story of success in the last decade, but the progress is incomplete and fragile, and the COVID crisis shows us that. And we know that the principle of equal pay for equal work, or work for equal value, has been enshrined in the treaties since 1957, and still, as of today, women earn less than men on average. So we have some challenges to deal with, and we need really a comprehensive set of measures to tackle the root causes of gender inequalities in the labor market.
Okay, thank you very much, Martina. And Blandina, what's the take home? What should we take back with us from today, please?
Well, I'm very, very hopeful with the set of measures that Frances listed as being on her table at the moment. It sounds very ambitious. I just want to remind ourselves that also the gender pay gap, as useful as it is, it can be a little bit limiting as a measure. So I try not to look at the pay gap in isolation, and always also look at gender gaps in earnings, because that's where you can see the differences in working time, and the pension gap. So let's try to keep in mind those three types of indicators when discussing those issues, because they really give us the full picture in all its complexity.
Okay, thank you very much, Blandine. And I'd like to thank the audience as well for all the questions that you logged into the chat. We tried to answer most of them. There's always more information on the website of AGA and on Eurofound, where all the reports that were referred to, that you can find them. And also the joint publication, Upwards Convergence in Gender Equality, How Close is the Union of Equality, where you get kind of a more differentiated picture between countries, which we have not been able to provide today due to the limited time that we had. So I'd like to thank Blandine and Martina and Frances as well for the interesting discussion that we had today. I'd like to thank the audience for participating, and looking forward to the next webinar on gender equality, hoping that we can report some progress. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.